A weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroot Institute, and I'm delighted you're here today because, you know, at Grassroot Institute and at Think Tech Hawaii, we care about good information in front of the public. Without that good information, without the knowledge of what is really going on, we the public, or we the people, can hardly make good decisions for government. And that's what we need. Today's program is called Media and Liberty. The media at one point were called journalism, the fourth estate. In addition to the other branches of government, we need an independent one in order to maintain our freedoms. Today, I'm talking with a man who knows all about that. He's the president in Hawaii for Summit Media, a conglomerate that owns radio stations, many of them the top radio stations in their markets. And he's also been global, worldwide, in dealing with issues of media and liberty. And I'd like you to welcome my friend today, TJ Malievsky. TJ, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kelili. Good to be here.
Well, it's always good to talk with you. And, you know, when I think of somebody who understands the ins and outs of doing media in different venues and different markets, I think about you.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean you haven't been able to hold a job for a very long time in one place. It means,
well, I'm been long enough to be able to do that.
It means you've had a tremendous variety of venues in which you've worked. You want to tell our viewers a little bit about that?
Well, here's the way I say it about my career. I say that I've worked half in for-profit, half in non-profit, half in radio, half in TV, half in Christian, half in secular media. So you take 35 years, just cut it right down the middle, and you got my career.
And some of that you've spent in the Mideast, actually.
Yeah, and the other thing is about a third of the career has been overseas. So I actually worked about 10 years of my 35 years overseas working on media over there.
You know, TJ, a lot of times people think of radio as primarily entertainment. And then when they think beyond entertainment, they think of it as primarily sales. But I'm not sure a lot of people in our country think of radio as being a key component to the preservation and promotion of liberty. And you've been involved in that across the world in global settings, as well as in local settings that have been very politically sensitive.
Sure.
Well, what do you think the relationship is between radio and freedom?
You know, I think you got to go back to kind of see where radio started and what its purpose was. Radio is free.
Yes.
So, for instance, when you buy your cable channels, you're paying for those. And so when you pick up Home and Garden TV or CNN, they're getting pennies on the dollar for bringing you the broadcast. So that's being passed through to them. And that can help them a lot with their programming. It can also influence them with their programming.
Sure. You know what I like about radio being free, in addition to my not having to pay for it, is that there's a real relationship between whether you're doing something that meets the public need and whether you get listened to, and then whether you get sponsors. And so there are a lot of areas in this world today, like government, where there's no relationship between what you do and results.
Yeah.
And in radio, you're on the line every day, aren't you?
Well, in the end, we're governed by the FCC. Our licenses are renewed. You know, it's changed over the years, but every 5, 7, 10 years, depending on the area you were in. So in order to meet the requirements of getting your license renewed, you had to serve the public.
Sure.
To this day, we still have public affairs programming where we bring in people like yourself and we interview them and talk about the issues that are important in the marketplace. We're also the first stop for people in moments of crisis. If we have a tsunami watch or, you know, there's a storm that's come up that's really important for people to learn about, radio serves as that final stop. And there are people, especially in Hawaii, in places that are very remote, who can't get TV service when the cable company goes out, but they can listen to the radio and hear what's going on. So we serve the public first.
Sure.
Because of that, we are free in that sense, but we are accountable to the FCC.
Absolutely. But at the same time, you're different than public radio, which I think is wonderful. But it's a different animal altogether because it's funded either by government and or the private sector through donations. So it's on, regardless necessarily of how well it performs to its audience. But you're on the line every day. If your ratings go down, you don't attract sponsors.
That's it.
Radio is kind of like a form of free market, in a sense, where the ability to compete and to provide a product that really touches the hearts of people is really what it's all about.
Well, we have to super serve our audience.
Yes.
It's just like if you walked down the street and you looked at two restaurants. One on one side of the street did Italian food, the other one on the other side of the street did Chinese food. You would not just experience different kinds of food, but different qualities of service, quality of ambiance, and you would come away from each one thinking, that's my favorite, that's my second favorite. It's the same thing with radio. Now, getting to your point about, public radio versus private radio, commercial radio is the best way to say it. The FCC has actually set aside the 88 to 92 FM band for what's called educational. So, for instance, you'll hear PBS in there because their mandate is to educate.
They're right at the front end.
That's right, and you'll see a lot of Christian stations on that side because they're teaching people about the gospel and about the teachings.
Religious education.
That's correct. And in fact, in some parts of the country, you'll find even political stations. They consider themselves teachers and educational, and so they're nonprofit too. So those nonprofits are sort of at the bottom of the dial, and then you start getting into everything 92 FM and beyond, and that's where you really get into a lot of the commercial stations. But each of us is beholden to the costs and to the FCC all at once.
Sure.
So we have to walk that fine line.
In your career, which has spanned many, many broadcast markets across the world, we'll go back to our original question now. I took you off of it a little bit, but what really is the relationship between free radio and liberty in any nation, whether it be the United States or whether it be another nation?
I just finished a stint for 3 years as a CEO of a company that was abroad. It was based in Cyprus, actually.
Sure.
And it had offices in London and Cyprus and Dubai and Egypt as well as Chicago.
It was a broadcast company?
It was a TV production company, but everything we produced went over the airwaves. So I started my position the day of the Arab Spring in Egypt, and we had an office there. And it was very clear the importance of media there and how government tries to influence media. For instance, the day that this started happening, I think there were 17 days when the people were protesting.
Yes.
By the time Mubarak left office, it was 17 days. And the kids were actually in the squares protesting, and because the government station was showing a peaceful scene, they would take their cameras and at the same spot on the bridge where people were protesting, they were showing the quiet on the other end of the bridge saying nothing's happening. But the kids knew a lot was happening, and they were taking their cell phones and they were sending each other emails over Facebook.
There you go.
And they'd go into a square and they'd protest, and tanks would come toward them in the public square. And they would text each other or email each other and say, the tanks are coming from the left. And the whole crowd would shift to another square until the tanks moved out of that place, and then they'd come back. So that is the definition right there, perfectly exhibited, because the state-run media was controlling the information, trying to convince people nothing was happening.
How about that?
But the hands in the independent hands of these kids with these cell phones, they knew something else was happening, and that was spreading the information.
That's almost like one of these choreographed crowd moves that you see when people go into a shopping mall and then all converge and sing the Hallelujah chorus or something like that.
Mob. I forget
we're media guys, but we can't even remember. Mob crowd, mob sourcing. I'm sure out there all of you know what we're talking about. But let me let you continue, because you're on your way to say something about that and what you saw happening with media.
So with media, we take it for granted in the U.S. that media is free from influence, because we do have a lot of media that we can access. It's not like that overseas and in countries where there is oppression of any kind. For instance, if you go to Dubai today, Dubai would consider themselves a free country, but if you go to Dubai today and you went into the internet shops, you can't get CNN.com in the internet shops. You can't get Western style media there. And so you have to do with what information you can get. And so they close that off, and they don't allow you to see what's outside coming in. In Russia, for instance, if you look at the Sochi Olympics, it's very clear to me that they're putting out a message they've crafted rather than the real message. I've actually done work in Russia over the years, and I've sat there especially after the Berlin Wall fell, and I was working with people in TV there, and I can tell you pre-Berlin Wall and post-Berlin Wall were two completely different ways of reporting media. Every single TV station in places like Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland were all satellites of the Moscow broadcast. Once the wall fell, they all became free and open, and they began to do their own broadcast, and they began to talk about things in a way that was transparent.
That's something. You know, the free flow of information certainly played a role in the falling of the Berlin Wall.
Yes.
It certainly played a role in the lifting of the Iron Curtain. And it's interesting to think at points of history how things might be different. We were talking about a term earlier, and now my failing memory comes back. It's a flash mob we were talking about.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I was thinking, what would have happened if we'd had handheld internet accessible devices in 1989 in Tiananmen Square?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you would have choreographed a totally different result. And in some of our visits to China, I've talked with people who've talked of how different disasters have actually been averted by the use of mass communication since Tiananmen Square. And at the very least, making the government aware that whatever's going on at a local level can be broadcast globally because of that connectivity. Now let me shift gear just a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, how has the rise of the World Wide Web, the rise of the internet and mobile access fit with radio as one of the factors leading to freedom and so forth? Are they complementary? Are they competitive? How do you see it?
Well, first of all, in my lifetime, I hope I'm not dating myself too much, but I started...
Well, you knew Thomas Jefferson.
I started broadcasting in the late 70s. And when I started broadcasting, there were no fax machines.
That's right.
There were no cell phones. There was no internet. We used to send each other telexes when we wanted a contract to come overnight somewhere.
Or when a fax would come in, we would all stand around the fax machine watching the document print out.
That's exactly. So we've come a long way in our lifetimes. I think more has happened technologically in our lifetime than any time before, because it's exponentially getting faster. And I can tell you that the growth of the web and the internet has changed everything, and this is what I mean by that. Today you can be sitting in Alaska, in Moscow, in Tokyo, and in Hawaii, and you can hear the same broadcast from KINE, which is one of our stations that we have here. You can hear your favorite disc jockeys from when you were here as a tourist for 2 weeks, 5 years ago. The reason is because of streaming. So nowadays we use the web the way you would use a paved road. If the paved road didn't exist, you had to go on dirt roads, and you had to go only as far as the dirt road allowed you to go. Now it's as if the paved roads have opened up everywhere, and we can go everywhere all at once without interference.
Well, that's incredible when we think of the information that can come.
The superhighway.
As well as the local observation that can be sent across the world. We're going to come right back after this. You mentioned streaming, and actually you can watch our program, Hana, Kakou, on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network, streaming live right now on Spreaker.com and other internet channels. You can go to the thinktechhawaii.com website and take a look at past episodes. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute. My guest today is TJ Malievsky, Summit Hawaii's president here. We'll talk with you in just a moment. Welcome back to Hana, Kakou, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroot Institute. Hana, Kakou. You've all heard the phrase "e pule Kakou," which means let's pray together. At Grassroot Institute, we also say Hana, Kakou. Let's work together, uniting Hawaii's people for a better economy, government, and society. And an important value there is the freedom of information, the flow of information, access to information, and that's what the media give to us. They give us an independent, most often independent, but not always, an independent opportunity to critique what the government is doing or what is going on in society in general, and to connect with people. One of the things about radio, and I'm going to ask my guest about this in just a moment, is that there have always been predictions about it going out of date, about it being passé. There were predictions when television came out that there would no longer be any need for radio. And today, with the World Wide Web and the internet, some people have also predicted that. I'm going to ask our expert today to weigh in on this. He's TJ Malievsky. He's president, CEO of Hawaii's Summit Media, which is part of a national and perhaps international organization that operates radio stations across the country. And here he operates some of the top radio stations in their market here. TJ, welcome back again.
Thank you very much.
TJ, what do you think about that? You've heard that before, that radio has had its day and that we no longer are in the heyday of those programs and shows by which many of us remember, well, actually I saw it on documentaries, the early days of radio and so forth. What are your thoughts about that? With the rise of media today, new technologies, what's the place of radio?
I think it needs to be said, first of all, as long as there are people driving cars, we won't see the end of radio.
You know, whether they're petroleum-fueled cars or whether they're solar-fueled cars.
I had a meeting with someone a month or so ago, and we were talking about doing traffic and talking about the traffic on the air. And the gentleman said to me, you know what my pet peeve is? I'll be listening to traffic, and the guy will say, for more information about traffic, go to our webpage. And he said, how am I going to do that hands-free in my car? How can I take my eyes off the road and do that? And that's it in a nutshell. As long as we can't be texting, as long as we can't be taking our hands and eyes off the wheels in the road, we're going to need radio. Radio is still the most immediate, best piece of information you can get at your fingertips as your mobile.
Well, I agree with you, and there are many offices where radio is played in the background while people are doing their work. But what would you say to young people today who use their mobile devices to access their music, their programming from the internet? And it's highly personalized. They can, at a certain hour, stream a certain kind of broadcast, a favorite program, a favorite artist, and so forth. Many of them seem to feel that radio's not relevant any longer, at least to them. How do you weigh that in the overall market?
You know, information is there for us to live our lives more richly. If you're living in a place like Honolulu, for instance, you want to hear what's happening locally.
Right.
It doesn't interest you to hear that there's a concert in Washington, D.C. tonight. You're not going to get there anyway. You are interested in who's playing in a concert in your town. You're interested in hearing about the weather in your town. You're interested in hearing about topics in your town, the politics. These sorts of things can only be generated at the local level. And so in the end, you can never circumvent local media. Now, however, having said that, we've seen the disintegration of the printed page for information, but there's a good reason for that. It's because with the immediacy of the web and the ability to turn on your radio and get information, many people don't want to sit down and, first of all, buy a newspaper and then have to sit there and read it and take a half hour out of their day. So this crunching of time has created this need for more immediate information. That's not necessarily where you stop everything you're doing. Radio is a companion piece of a bit of information. So you mentioned people listening in their offices and so on. We have the station, KRTR FM, which is considered to be the at-office listening leader. That we have more listeners listeners in offices and banks around Hawaii than any other radio station. We could prove that with our ratings. And that's because it is a companion. You can get some sort of live and interesting information if you're a bank teller.
Sure.
And you're sitting at the bank and it's 3:15, you know you're leaving the office at 4 o'clock, and you're able to hear some music and hear that traffic, a certain way going home is blocked. You're going to be glad to hear that.
Well, you know, certainly radio has that capacity of being in the background without being obtrusive. And then when we want to focus in, somehow our minds pick up, we hear something, and then we focus on it. And so I think it's here to stay as long as we're stuck in traffic. You're right. And by the way, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Are you in a conspiracy with our roads department and our transportation in Hawaii? You know, we have the third worst traffic in North America, Vancouver, Los Angeles, and Hawaii. And I've been in studio. In fact, I've been in one of your studios once during a marathon fundraising event where the DJ lamented the traffic situation for the audience, and then once we were off air for a moment, said, "Yay, people are stuck in traffic. They're listening to us." Because that's when your message gets across.
If there's a conspiracy, it's in Detroit, because they're the ones who are making all these cars, or we're still dependent on them to get everywhere. But I think it goes, much deeper than that. Yet it's kind of more simple, and that is that people want the freedom to move. They want to be able to get to work when they want, leave when they want. They want to be able to stop at the supermarket. They want to be able to pick up their kids, do all the things that you do in your life. And that creates, gridlock on our roads.
Sure.
So we do the best we can to serve people who are in this situation. We didn't put them there, but we're certainly going to serve them. That's our job. Our job, as defined by the FCC, is to super serve the local public with information. And in our case, we also provide entertainment.
Sure. Do you think that talk radio is a great value to the public? And my understanding is that most of talk radio tends to be produced by conservative parties, not a lot of it by liberals. We had Air America at one time,
Sure.
Free America, not Radio Free, Radio America at one time. Didn't last very well. And I just wonder what your thoughts were about that, because a lot of that talk radio, political talk radio, is highly politicized.
Our research shows that the older a person gets, the more they like to listen to talk radio. You'll find that younger people are not as interested in issues yet. They're not as interested in interacting. They're not as interested in stimulating themselves about those conversations for long periods of time. They want entertainment. But as you get older, as you become people of community, you start getting involved with your children in activities. You start becoming part of the PTA, and you start to vote more, and you want to see things change in your city. Then you start thinking about the importance of the issues. That's where talk radio comes in, and it becomes popular with people. The difference between conservative talk radio and other forms of talk radio is, I think, simply this. Conservative talk radio has figured out the hot button issues and done a better job of talking about them. Forget the fact that they may take a position. I think they talk about them properly in a way that people can make their own judgment call on it and where they stand. And let's face it, if I say something that you disagree with, you're going to like to talk to me as much as if I said something you agree with. So if conservative talk radio is successful, it's only because of the issues being important to the people that are listening.
Why do you think liberal talk radio, and again, we're using stereotypical words, conservative, liberal, and so forth, and perhaps in another program we'll talk about the fact that they're really relativistic words, but just to be a foil to conservative talk radio, why don't we see the same phenomenon as liberal talk radio? Or is it that point of view already commands television or other forms of media?
No, I think because we have public radio, that would be considered to be more liberal.
All right.
Now, they will tell you that they are without any kind of bias at all. This is simply not true. Everything I do in my life, I bring bias to.
Sure.
I pick a certain toothpaste because I like the flavor. I walk down a certain road because I like the view. So if I'm doing talk radio, and I can tell you as someone who has been on the radio for many years doing things, I always bring my bias to whatever I do. And I think the same is true with public radio. Because public radio has proliferated across the country, they are that center to left leaning ideology. And so doing that already, there's probably less room for liberal talk radio to succeed against the conservative talk radios. Conservative talk radio has always taken the position that we're going to be commercial, we're going to pay for ourselves, and we're going to say whatever we want. But the liberal talk radio people are up against public radio, and they're not going to be as successful.
Let me switch gears altogether here, TJ. What drew you to radio and keeps you in radio? You've had a lot of opportunity to be elsewhere, television, production, and so forth. But you're back, head of a group of radio stations again. There's obviously something there that attracts you.
I think what it is, you know, I saw a survey once that was done, some survey results done about what happened pre-1980 and post-1980 in music, and it really explains it for me.
The 80s, yeah.
Yeah, before the 80s, if you heard a song by the Beach Boys in 1968, you imagined yourself in your car with your girlfriend down by the lake, hearing that song, having a picnic, and it brought an emotion to you when you heard it that resonated within your spirit. After 1980, the biggest change we had was MTV. All of a sudden, people experienced the hits in a fresh way in their room, alone, watching TV. And so their experience was not communal, and it was not as emotionally resonant, it was more flat. So when you think about radio and the way I grew up with radio, it was magical. When you heard a song on the radio, you knew it was not at the record stores yet, that it was breaking a hit, for instance. And you also know that you could hear it over and over and over again, and it would become a communal experience. You would walk into your school, all the kids would be singing that song. You would go to your prom, and that song was the theme of the prom. That's not the case anymore, and it's almost, there's a separation between the emotion and the reality of our music. And so now, the kids who do listen to radio want to hear their songs, but they also have a different way of listening, and that's through their iPods and through the web. We, however, grew up that way, and that's what drew me to radio. I found it to be magical. The other thing was, back in the day, so to speak, the disc jockeys were purely entertainers and truly imagination, people with imaginations that were on the radio, the Wolfman Jacks of the world. These were people who could take you outside of yourself and tell you a story, and you felt like when you heard them, you were transported to another land, another time. Today, when we listen to radio, it's kind of more a laundry list of what's going on. But back in the day when I started, it was more interesting kind of thoughts and musings by the DJ about the music or about the place where we live or about the place where he lived. It was very exciting. And I think the other thing was, in those days, you could hear a radio station where I grew up in Minneapolis that was coming from San Diego, from New York, because back then, at nighttime especially, they had big kilowatt stations that traveled across the country at night. And so as a kid, I would listen to radio at midnight underneath my bed sheets, and I would think about New York, where the disc jockey was talking about that song playing and what was happening in New York that day.
You know, you talk about how music had a certain effect upon us, especially when it came across the radio back in the 60s, 70s, and so forth, and how that has changed. There are many watchers of culture who believe that the content of music, both the actual lyrics of the music as well as the embedded lifestyles or of the performers and so forth, are sending forth a kind of moral tone in our culture that isn't healthy for us. It doesn't build society. It doesn't reinforce the concept of good families or faithfulness in marriage, respect for law, and so forth. And you've been in such a variety of settings and stations and so forth. You've seen this. Interestingly, when I was being interviewed on your station here in one of the Summit stations, the interviewer during a break said he had worked for another station before, and because of the content of the morning program in terms of its moral values, which he just couldn't stand, and he didn't feel good for society, he quit.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
And so my question to you is, what role has commercial music played in the quality of values in this great nation of ours, especially in the last 20 years?
You know, I tend to think that it's degraded, but then I think back to the 60s, and I'm not so sure that it wasn't as bad or worse then, but we just have idealized it. For instance, now we say great times and great oldies as if it was perfect. Well, I was a kid in the 60s, and I remember looking at the news every night. There were 100 body bags coming home from Vietnam every night on the news. The streets were being lit up by rioting. The politics were all about protesting and people killing each other in the streets. And I just think what it is today, the content that is not very good for us as families is more vacuous.
Yes.
It doesn't seem to have a purpose. It
Right.
entertains and titillates, but back then we talked about a cause and an ideology, and that's what made it acceptable.
Where have all the ballads gone?
Right.
This is Keli'i Akina talking with my friend TJ Malievsky, who's president of Summit Media in Hawaii, heads up some of the leading radio stations here. We're talking about media and freedom. We'll come right back after this short message. Before we go, let me say thanks to Think Tech Hawaii and its producer, Jay Fidel. You're doing a great job of getting information out across the world, and we'll be right back after this short message.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the Think Tech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Maria Kashem of Think Tech Hawaii, and I want to tell you about our Think Tech talk shows. If you didn't know it, Think Tech streams video and audio for all of its shows live on the internet from 2 to 5 p.m. every weekday afternoon, and we replay them all night long on ustream.tv. Visit thinktechhawaii.com for our live stream and YouTube links. Raise your awareness on Think Tech. I'm Maria Kashem, and I'll see you there.
Well, I'm glad you're back. You're watching a Hana Kakou. We're here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroot Institute. We're an independent think tank that helps to influence society for the good. And what does that mean? The think tank side simply means we do research, and we access research from across the nation and across the world so that we can speak to issues that we're facing here in Hawaii. On the other side, we're working for a better economy, a better government, a better society, and you can find out more about Grassroot Institute at Grassroot, that's singular, grassrootinstitute.org. My guest today, TJ Malievsky, understands the role of media with a free society, or in a free society. We're in a political season now as we go forward in the year 2014. You're going to hear a lot of the radio that you listen to carry political messages, and maybe even have a political point of view depending upon who funds your stations or how your stations respond to sponsors. I want to talk a little bit about the role of politics, or at least the role of radio in politics, with TJ. TJ, you have worked, in many settings in which that campaign season comes around, and a very big part of funding the station is providing airtime to political candidates. We're going into another season like that. You're facing that with your station as well. Any thoughts about this whole concept of political advertising as well as politics and radio?
Well, first it has to be said that because we're governed by the FCC, we have to allow for equal time. It doesn't matter who comes on. If they're running for an office and there are 10 other people that are running for that office, we have to give them an equal opportunity to speak.
Sure. Could you just explain that and how it works? Does that mean if somebody buys time that who's a political candidate, you have to give another political candidate, his opponent, the same opportunity? Does it also mean you could refuse to give someone that time and thereby be able to refuse to give anyone else that time?
What it is it works in two ways.
Sure.
One is where a guest may come on who's a senator,
okay,
who comes on in the morning and says, on the morning show, and says, here's what I believe should happen with the train initiative and what I think we should be spending our money on. Well, her opponents or his opponents could call us and say, you know, I disagree with that, and I'm running on a platform that's against that. I want you to give me equal time. So we'd have to let that person come on in the morning another time, the same amount of time, to speak their voice about what it is. But secondarily, we allow what we call our lowest unit rate in a political year. So for instance, we're able to calculate what the lowest charge we have asked an advertiser for. Let's say it's $100 for a 30-second spot on a station. If we give that to a candidate, that lowest unit rate, which they have to be allowed to ask for, then we have to give it to everybody who asks for it. So as long as you're a registered candidate, you are allowed to access the same cost and the same opportunity as anybody else who is speaking in a way that you don't agree with, as long as you're a registered candidate.
Okay, well, I'm glad you clarified that, because we oftentimes hear equal time and aren't completely sure what it is. And so in a lot of cases, equal time only takes effect if somebody claims it, actually, and says, I heard this, and therefore I want the opportunity to respond. And I'm sure that in your settings, as a wise businessman, and you make sure that happens. Now, I took you off track.
Sure.
You began with that to say something about radio and politics.
What I wanted to say is that so much of our system is about who has the bigger wallet. And so when a candidate comes on, if they have very deep pockets, they can influence the political process tremendously more than someone who has just a few dollars. So what we see in radio is people tend to gravitate toward the audience that can be reached for the least amount of money with the greatest amount of return. And so, unfortunately, that's an unequal system. So even though they can have equal time, you could say to me, Neil Abercrombie, the governor of Hawaii, could say, well, I want to spend $50,000 with you, and I'm going to put forth my platform. We could turn to the other gubernatorial candidate and say, okay, well, you're welcome to the same rate. He may only have $10,000. So that's unequal in that case, because he has the opportunity to spend 50, but he doesn't have the money. So that's where you said to me, can you refuse anybody any access? Not really, not access, but we can say, you know, you have the same rate, we're going to treat you equally, but if you can't buy $50,000, you can buy $10,000. So what they'll tend to do is find a radio station that's maybe cheaper, that has certain types of demographics they want to reach, and maybe they'll get more out of their dollar with that group than with another group that costs more.
So equal access is also dependent upon the capacity of the candidate to pay for that.
Yes.
And do you know whether the FCC has ever taken that into consideration as an issue with which to debate in order to create a little more equality here? But it would seem to me that, in a sense, the free market is at play over here.
Yeah, the free market
those who have the most money ultimately have the greatest advantage, even with this equal time issue.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to this issue of fundraising and how much you can or can't raise in PACs, you know, political action committees, and how they can go out and raise a lot more money than somebody else.
Sure. Now, as a station manager, you've had at times PACs approach you, I would guess, and you can see right through them exactly who they're supporting and so forth, because it's pretty obvious. Do you ever struggle with that in terms of this fairness doctrine in terms of equal time?
I may struggle personally, but I cannot afford to struggle professionally.
Sure.
I have to abide by the rules, and everybody who comes to me that has a platform that is being accessed somehow by somebody else and talked about by somebody else, I have to give them the same access. And I can't do anything about that, nor would I want to, because the truth is, we live in a society that's all about free speech.
Sure.
And I would rather have an electorate that is well versed with opinions that I don't agree with, so that they can make their own opinion and be firm in their hearts about it, than to influence them in some way that maybe they don't agree with later.
Interesting. You're listening to TJ Malievsky, President CEO of Summit in Hawaii. He heads up some of the most popular radio stations, and we were talking about money in politics. I just want to cue you in on an alternate view. It's easy to say there's too much money in politics, but we have an interesting article that you can access at the Grassroots website called "There Isn't Enough Money in Politics" by Ralph Benko. Well, I'll let you think about that intriguing possibility. There certainly isn't enough money for the candidates who want their voice to be known when they're competing against people with bigger pockets than they had, deeper pockets than they have. But you'll find this and interesting information at grassrootsinstitute.org. We'll be right back on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network with a Hana Kakou right after this.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High-Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle in Kokowai, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
Aloha and welcome back for our final segment of today's installment of a Hana Kakou, which means let's work together. We're on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network, broadcasting throughout Hawaii and globally. My guest today, TJ Malievsky, president of Summit in Hawaii, which manages some of the top radio stations, has been giving us a tremendous insight into that industry and perspectives in the relationship of radio and freedom. We're going to talk in this final segment a little bit about land use. And that's very important to us in Hawaii because our entire cost structure is related to the fact that we have scarcity of this one commodity called land. And whether we're dealing with issues of development or the environment, or even radio, as you'll see in a moment, what is done with land impacts the public good. TJ, you've done a great job today informing me of the role of radio and freedom. Land is so important in Hawaii. People often don't think of land, they don't think of real estate when they think of radio, but you are keenly aware of the relationship between real estate and radio.
We have FM stations, which we have to have a high spot for the tower, where the signal goes out and it's only obstructed by structures in between,
sure,
or mountains in between. So we need places on top of mountains for that. AM radio, however, can be on the ground and we can send the signal out that way. But the AM stations tend to be more of an eyesore because they're in the city, they're along canals, they're in areas of the city where you're thinking, gee, it's a tough place to have a tower, and why is that there? But I guess the point I want to kind of make is we need radio towers to broadcast. We can't do our work of serving the public without a place where the signal emanates from. We actually have been forced to go on top of mountains and get out of cities more and more across the country.
Sure.
Because people aren't comfortable seeing a big tower on top of a building or next door to their YMCA. So we're fortunate in Hawaii in that we have Palihua Ridge, where a lot of our radio and TV towers are. We have a few other ridges where our broadcast facilities are. But there's something that the government here in Hawaii does that I take a little issue with, and that is that if you're on government land rather than private land, you tend to have, I believe they're called concessions, which means as a concession, you can only go month to month in your contracts. But we're pouring in hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars into these radio towers and TV towers to get them up to speed where they can serve the public. And we like to have long-term contracts as we put that money in. So I think it's important for the public to know that there's purpose in the places where we end up with our towers, that we do everything we can to make it appealing. A lot of towers now have beautiful kind of green structures and blending in. But beyond that, safety issues, we make sure that our RF is not very high. Once you get off the site, you're safe, everything's fine. We're highly regulated, so we know that we're in compliance in a lot of ways. But we have things like FAA, FCC, DOT, DLNR, the neighborhood community groups. We deal on 10 different levels when it comes to our towers, and so we need the cooperation of the public to do that.
Well, you know, you've touched upon some important issues here that the public needs to be aware of, because we frequently go to the polls, for example, and there's a city charter amendment, or there is a constitutional amendment, or there's something to vote on, and it's filled with words, and it might have something about broadcast towers or something, and we have no idea what's going on here.
Right.
We can't help the process any better. Now, I can see one problem, the one you raised, with the concession nature of using government land for your tower, and that's a very risky proposition for a business that has to pour in huge amounts of money into infrastructure that it might have to walk away from without any guarantee that next year it can be there. But TJ, theoretically, just theoretically, in the state in which concessions and contracts are a very big thing, can it also be used politically against stations? Because your renewal then is based upon what favor you have in the eyes of government. Is that a problem in terms of freedom, that there's less security here, or am I just thinking of this theoretically?
Well, I think that anybody in power can do that. They can make it difficult for you to be renewed. They can find reasons for your renewal not to take place. But I have not run into it.
Okay.
I have to say about Hawaii, the beauty of Hawaii is that we have a diverse population and we have diverse lawmakers. I tell people one of the beautiful things about Hawaii is that everybody gets their day in government. We've had Japanese, Haoles, Hawaiian governors. I love that about Hawaii. Everybody gets sort of their day to run things and have their opportunity to be in power. And because of it, I think it creates a balanced way of thinking.
You know, I just want to, for a moment here, send our viewers to the Grassroots Institute website to take a look at an article that has just been put up by one of our scholars, Lloyd Lim. He's an attorney and he has a fairly high position working for the state, but he's not writing in that capacity. And he's written an article called A Theory of Government Regulation, a theory of government regulation. And it helps us to understand a little bit of the issue you brought up. There's a lot of regulation on radio. Is there too much, too little, or you just live with it?
We respond to it. In other words, you know, in 1996 there was a tremendous deregulation of radio, where when I started in radio in the early 80s as a commercial broadcaster, you could only own 7 stations nationwide. Now you can own 7 stations in one city. So,
how many cities are in Hawaii?
Well, it's by island, actually, is the way it works.
There you go. So you really could own a large number of stations.
And there are groups that do. You could own, I think you can own 4 FMs on Oahu. You can own 3, I think, on Kauai, because it's a little bit small in the population.
And what's the impact for freedom of that? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that because of our terrain, we have to sort of share in the sense that we don't reach all the spots on the Big Island or Maui or Molokai even. But what happens is it creates a healthy competition.
Okay.
And so it's good for the people because they have a lot to choose from. So I think that's a positive thing.
Good.
And I think that we have adjusted to it. I don't think there's too much regulation now. I think there could be a little more regulation in the sense of cross ownership and
As
so
an aside, just to give 20 seconds to this, I've sensed that there's a greater vigor in neighbor island county radio nowadays than before. I don't know if my impression is correct or not.
Well, I think that in neighbor island radio, they are sort of masters of their own destiny. We are encroaching on the neighbor islands. We serve Honolulu, and so the message that we give to the neighbor islands tends to be Oahu centric, but they can take advantage of it, and they can have community stations out there and really super serve their local public, and so they have to be more grassroots oriented.
Yes, well, I've noticed that. Well, TJ, it's been wonderful talking with you, and the time is too short. We're at the end of our hour together, but appreciate you, what you're doing for the public good, how you're building our economy, and I love listening to your stations. Great quality. TJ
Thank
Malievsky.
you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Our guest today, TJ Malievsky, president of Summit Media here in Hawaii, giving us good quality radio, but also weighing in today on the relationship between radio and freedom. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroot Institute, wishing you aloha until next week on Hana, Kakou. Let's work together. We'll see you back here. Please go to our website, grassrootinstitute.org, to see previous programs, and also visit thinktechhawaii.com. Much aloha until next time.